They heard footsteps in the attic, but no one was there. A family of 6, living on a remote farm in Germany in 1922, kept telling neighbors that something felt wrong inside their home. Tools went missing. Keys vanished. Scraping noises echoed through the halls at night. And then the footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming from above their heads. Even though the attic was locked, the father searched. The mother prayed. The children whispered to each other in fear. And yet, the noises continued. The farm was called Hinterkaifeck. It sat in complete isolation, surrounded by thick forest and open fields. The nearest neighbors were far enough away that if you screamed, no one would hear you. And in that quiet, the Gruber family began to unravel. Andreas Gruber, the father, was 63 years old, known to be strict, sometimes harsh, but also respected in his community. His wife, Kazilia, was 72. Their daughter, Victoria, 35, had recently been widowed in the war. She lived at the farm with her 2 children, 7-year-old Kazilia and 2-year-old Joseph. The last member of the household was their maid, Maria, who had only just arrived to replace a servant who quit because she believed the farm was haunted. Imagine being in her shoes. You start a new job at a lonely farmhouse, only to hear the family tell you, "By the way, don't mind the footsteps in the attic. We've checked. Nobody's there." At first, the noises could be explained away. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was rats. But as days went on, Andreas began to find things he couldn't ignore. Footprints in the snow, leading from the forest directly to the farmhouse. But there were no footprints leading back. Whoever came to Hinterkaifeck never left. Andreas searched the property, but he found nothing. No intruder, no stranger hiding. Still, at night, the footsteps echoed. The family grew restless. Neighbors began whispering. And when the previous maid refused to return, Andreas decided to hire someone new. Maria arrived on March 31st, 1922. She unpacked her bags, probably trying to convince herself the stories weren't true. By nightfall, it was too late. That evening, sometime between sunset and midnight, the entire Gruber family, along with Maria the maid, was brutally murdered with a mattock, a heavy farming pickaxe. Not one person survived. But the horror didn't stop there, because what investigators discovered over the following days would turn Hinterkaifeck from a simple murder case into one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries in history. The killer didn't just take their lives. He stayed in the house. For days after the murders, smoke rose from the farmhouse chimney. Food was missing from the pantry. The livestock had been fed. Even the family's dog was cared for, all while 6 bodies lay cold inside the farmhouse. The murderer had moved in, living among the dead. Who was he? Why did he stay? And how did he disappear without a trace? This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murders, a case that has haunted Germany for more than a century and continues to baffle investigators to this very day. If you're just joining us, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. Trust me, you're going to want to stay until the very end, because the theories about what really happened here are stranger and darker than you can possibly imagine. In this phase, we'll walk through the crime scene, detail by horrifying detail, because the way the killer arranged the bodies and what he chose not to touch might reveal exactly who was hiding in the attic all along. When neighbors didn't see the Gruber family for several days, at first they thought nothing of it. On a remote farm like Hinterkaifeck, it wasn't unusual for a family to go quiet. But when young Kazilia missed school and Victoria failed to show up for choir practice at church, people began to worry. The farm was too silent. The smoke that had risen from the chimney only days earlier had stopped. On April 4th, a small search party made its way to the farm. They pushed open the wooden gates and crossed the yard. The air was cold, heavy with the smell of livestock. Everything looked in order until they stepped into the barn. What they found would haunt them forever. For bodies lay hidden beneath hay. Andreas, his wife Kazilia, Victoria, and little Kazilia, the 7-year-old girl. Their skulls had been crushed with a mattock. The killer had stacked them, one on top of another, as if arranging firewood. Blood had soaked into the dirt floor, their faces barely recognizable. The little girl's hands were torn and raw, as if she had clutched at her hair in terror before she died. Inside the farmhouse, the horror continued. In the maid's room, Maria lay dead in her bed, killed on her very first night at the farm. And in the nursery, 2-year-old Joseph was found lifeless in his cot. 6 people, brutally slaughtered, in the very place they should have been safest. But here's where the story becomes truly unsettling. Despite the massacre, the house didn't look abandoned. Bread had been cut, meals had been eaten, the cows had been milked, someone had been tending to the animals, after the family was already dead. Imagine standing there as an investigator. The house is filled with death, and yet it feels lived in. Who could do something like this? Who could kill children and then calmly sit down to dinner in the same kitchen? Neighbors told the police that smoke had risen from the chimney in the days following the murders. Someone had been inside. Someone had warmed themselves by the Gruber's fire, cooked their food, and slept in their beds, while the bodies decomposed just meters away. Investigators began searching for clues. The farmhouse was large, filled with rooms, passageways, and a cold attic above. What they discovered only deepened the mystery. Doors had been locked from the inside. Windows were unbroken. The family dog was alive, though agitated, chained in the barn. The footprints in the snow that Andreas had noticed days earlier suddenly made sense. Someone had come to Hinterkaifeck and never left. One of the most chilling details was how the killer treated the bodies. Coverings were placed over some of the victims. Victoria and her mother were found with their faces carefully covered with cloth. Maria the maid had her body draped in sheets. Joseph's cradle was covered with Victoria's dress. Whoever did this wasn't in a rush. They took their time. It was almost ritualistic, as if covering their victims gave them a twisted sense of control. The autopsies revealed something even darker. Young Kazilia had lived for several hours after the attack. With her skull shattered, she lay beside her dead family in the barn, slowly dying. Her torn hands showed she had pulled out clumps of her own hair in agony and fear. The image of that child, left to suffer, is one of the most horrifying aspects of the case. The police tried to piece together a timeline. They believed the murders happened on the night of March 31st. That night, the family's food was left uneaten, their chores unfinished, but afterward the farm carried on. Whoever stayed there fed the animals, cooked meals, and even cut meat from the family's pantry. Some neighbors even claimed they saw smoke rising from the chimney for nearly a week after the murders. This led to one chilling conclusion. The killer or killers didn't just kill the Gruber family. They moved into their home. Before we go further, let me ask you, what kind of person do you think could commit such an act? Was it personal? Was it random? Drop your theory in the comments below, because the deeper we go into this mystery, the stranger it becomes. And if you're hooked, make sure you're subscribed. The next details will chill you. The police launched one of the largest investigations Bavaria had ever seen. Over 100 suspects were interviewed. Theories flew in every direction. Maybe it was a robbery gone wrong, maybe a jealous lover, maybe even a soldier returning from the war. But none of it fit. For one thing, valuables were left untouched. Jewelry, money, and food supplies were still in the house. If it had been a robbery, why wouldn't the killer take the riches? And why stay behind to feed the animals? The manner of the killings also raised questions. The blows were precise, delivered with rage but also control. Whoever killed the Grubers seemed to know them well enough to stay behind, and yet no one in the village could explain who it might have been. Witnesses began to recall strange things. One reported seeing a figure watching the farmhouse from the forest in the days before the murders. Another claimed they saw a stranger with a long beard wandering the area. But when these sightings were followed up, nothing concrete came of them. Then there were the strange sounds and missing items before the murders. Remember the footsteps in the attic? The family believed someone had been living in the house with them for weeks. Keys went missing, tools were displaced. Could the killer have been hiding in the attic the whole time, watching the family, learning their routines, waiting for the right night to strike? The crime scene was chaotic. Unfortunately, the investigation suffered from major mistakes. Curious villagers walked through the farmhouse before police secured it, contaminating evidence. Some even cooked meals in the kitchen while investigators worked, destroying potential clues. Autopsies were performed in the barn using tools at hand instead of in a proper facility. In short, the investigation began on shaky ground. And yet, certain details stood out. There was hay spread across the barn floor, as though someone had been sleeping there. The dog had been fed, even after barking furiously during the discovery of the bodies. The killer had cared for the animals but showed no mercy to the family. Neighbors began whispering theories. Some believed Andreas Gruber had enemies. He was a strict man, not always liked. Others pointed to Victoria, who was said to have complicated relationships in the village. Rumors swirled that Joseph, the 2-year-old, might not have been fathered by her late husband, but by someone much closer, maybe even her own father. If true, it suggested a family secret that could have led to violence. The police chased these leads, but nothing ever solidified. No fingerprints, no confessions, no solid suspect. Just shadows and theories. And then came the most unsettling detail of all. Witnesses claimed to have seen lights flickering at the farm even after the bodies were discovered, as if someone had returned, unwilling to let go of Hinterkaifeck. Who was hiding in the attic? Why did they stay in the house, living among the dead? And why, after one of the largest investigations in German history, was no one ever brought to justice? We'll dive into the suspects, the jealous neighbors, the mysterious soldiers, even whispers of supernatural forces. Because in a case this eerie, the theories are as haunting as the crime itself. And don't forget, if you're watching this right now, hit like so more people see this story, and drop your theory in the comments. Could it have been someone close to the family? Or a stranger who never left the attic? The discovery of the 6 bodies at Hinterkaifeck shocked Bavaria. But the shock turned into frustration when investigators realized they were dealing with more questions than answers. No valuables had been stolen. The killer had lingered in the house, and the family had complained of strange noises before their deaths. Who would do this and why? To answer that, investigators began looking closely at the people around the Grubers. The first group of suspects were the neighbors. Hinterkaifeck was isolated, but not entirely cut off. The closest farm was about half a kilometer away, and the Grubers were not particularly well liked. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch, had a reputation for being harsh, controlling, and difficult. Some neighbors respected him, but others resented him. It wasn't impossible that a local grudge could have escalated to violence. One name that appeared early in the investigation was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a farmer who lived nearby. Lorenz had a complicated history with Victoria, Andreas's daughter. After Victoria's husband died in the war, Lorenz had pursued a relationship with her. Some accounts suggest they were engaged, but it ended badly. Victoria later gave birth to Joseph, her 2-year-old son. The official story was that Joseph was fathered by Victoria's late husband, but rumors swirled in the village that Joseph was actually Lorenz's child. To make matters worse, there were also dark whispers that Joseph might have been fathered by Andreas himself. The possibility of incest between Andreas and Victoria was an open rumor in the community. Years earlier, both had been tried and convicted of incest. Andreas served time in prison. Victoria received a suspended sentence. Though both denied continuing the relationship, suspicion remained. This created tension, humiliation, and motive. For Lorenz, this was explosive. If Joseph was his son, then he had a claim to Victoria and her household. If Joseph was Andreas's, it meant Victoria was trapped in a deeply abusive relationship. Either way, Lorenz had reason to be angry. The night the bodies were discovered, Lorenz was part of the search party that entered the farm. Witnesses later testified that his behavior was strange. Some said he walked through the house calmly, almost as if he knew where everything was. Others noted he tampered with the scene, unlocking doors, moving objects, and even disturbing the bodies. He allegedly commented on Joseph's beyond neighbors, the police considered outsiders. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany was unstable. Soldiers returning from the front sometimes wandered rural areas, homeless and traumatized. There were also reports of vagrants and criminals moving from town to town. Could a stranger have stumbled onto Hinterkaifeck, killed the family, and then vanished? parentage at the scene, calling the boy his child. Naturally, suspicion fell on him. Did Lorenz finally snap? Did he kill the Grubers out of jealousy, anger, or revenge? Investigators questioned him multiple times, but in the end, no evidence tied him directly to the crime. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses placing him at the farm on the night of the murders, and no clear way to prove motive. Though Lorenz remained a popular suspect in the public's mind, the police never charged him. Other neighbors were also investigated. Some had feuds with Andreas over property boundaries, debts, or simple dislike. But again, none of these led to hard evidence. Beyond neighbors, the police considered outsiders. In the aftermath of World War I, Germany was unstable. Soldiers returning from the front sometimes wandered rural areas, homeless and traumatized. There were also reports of vagrants and criminals moving from town to town. Could a stranger have stumbled onto Hinterkaifeck, killed the family, and then vanished? Investigators interviewed traveling salesmen, craftsmen, and anyone reported in the area, but none fit the timeline. The problem with the stranger theory was the details of the crime. Whoever killed the Grubers knew their way around the farm. They fed the animals, used the kitchen, and moved confidently through the house. It seemed unlikely that an outsider could slip into the house, commit 6 murders, and then live there comfortably without knowing the property. The incest rumors opened another path for investigators. Victoria had inherited money from her late husband, and she was well known in the local church community. Some believed she planned to leave Hinterkaifeck and start fresh, possibly with Lorenz or someone else. If that was true, Andreas may have resisted. The relationship between father and daughter was known to be tense, and neighbors described hearing shouting from the farmhouse at times. Could the murders have been the result of family conflict that spiraled out of control? If Andreas himself was violent, why were all 6 family members killed? And if it was an internal family conflict, why would the killer stay in the house afterward? These questions made the incest theory disturbing but incomplete. Then came the footprints in the snow. Remember, Andreas had reported finding them days before the murders. Tracks leading from the forest to the house, but none leading away. Investigators mapped them out. They were clear, deliberate prints. Whoever left them had walked straight to Hinterkaifeck. That suggested planning. But with no prints leaving, where had the person gone? Did they slip into the attic and wait? The possibility that someone was living in the house before the murders chilled the entire village. Witnesses gave even stranger accounts. One neighbor reported seeing smoke from the chimney days after the murders. Another said they noticed someone's face peering from the window when they passed by. At least one person claimed to hear machinery working at the farm when no one should have been there. These observations suggested the killer wasn't in a hurry to leave. They were bold enough to continue daily routines at the farm, as if daring the community to notice. The police broadened the investigation. More than 100 suspects were questioned, including soldiers, thieves, and even suspects from outside Bavaria. They examined people with histories of violence, people with grudges against the Grubers, and people rumored to have relationships with Victoria. They even considered whether a group of killers was involved, given how efficiently the murders were carried out. But every lead collapsed. Witnesses contradicted each other. Alibis held up under scrutiny. And crucially, forensic evidence was nearly useless at the time. There were no reliable fingerprint techniques in rural Bavaria in 1922, and DNA testing was still decades away. The killer left no confession, no clear evidence, only horror. At this point, I have to ask, what do you think happened? Was it Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the jealous neighbor? Was it a stranger hiding in the attic? Or was the truth hidden inside the Gruber family itself? Drop your theory in the comments, because even now, no one agrees. And if you're finding this as haunting as I am, don't forget to like this video and subscribe. Over the years, new details have surfaced, but each has only deepened the mystery. In the 1940s, long after the murders, a woman came forward claiming her mother had confessed on her deathbed to knowing who the killer was. The name she gave was passed to the police, but by then, too much time had passed. The suspect was dead, and no evidence could be gathered. Decades later, in 1999, Students at a police academy in Furstenfeldbruck re-examined the case as part of their training. They pored over the surviving files, re-interviewed descendants of witnesses, and tried to apply modern techniques. Their conclusion? They strongly suspected Lorenz Schlittenbauer, but admitted there was not enough evidence to ever prove it in court. Other theories remain. Some suggest multiple killers, perhaps neighbors working together, perhaps robbers who panicked. But if robbery was the motive, why stay and live in the house? Why feed the animals? Why risk being caught? A few even believe the crimes had a ritual element. The careful covering of the faces, the stacking of the bodies, the choice of a mattock, a farming tool, rather than a firearm. Could the killer have been performing some twisted ritual, acting out a personal obsession? And then, of course, there are the supernatural theories. Hinterkaifeck was already considered a strange, haunted place before the murders. The previous maid quit because she believed it was cursed. The footsteps in the attic, the missing keys, the vanished tools, all pointed, in her mind, to a presence in the house. After the murders, locals refused to go near the farm at night. Some claimed to hear voices when they passed by. The land itself seemed poisoned by what had happened. Yet none of this brought answers. In 1923, the farmhouse was demolished. The land was cleared, and the site was left bare. Today, only a small memorial stands there, a stone marker with the names of the 6 victims. The murders of Hinterkaifeck remain one of the most chilling unsolved cases in history. Every attempt to solve it has ended in failure. Every suspect has been dismissed, and every new theory only raises more questions. The Hinterkaifeck murders didn't just end with the discovery of 6 bodies. They became a story that refused to die, a century-long mystery that has haunted Germany and true crime enthusiasts across the world. In this final part, let's step into the legacy of the case, the enduring theories, and the chilling details that no investigator has ever been able to explain. In the days after the murders, the village of Kaifeck was frozen in fear. People locked their doors at night, farmers carried weapons, and children were forbidden from walking alone. The idea that someone could slaughter 6 people with a mattock and then vanish without a trace terrified everyone. Police presence in the area surged. Detectives combed through barns, forests, and abandoned huts, but the killer seemed to dissolve into the landscape. No bloody clothing was ever found, no weapon traced to an owner, and no reliable eyewitness emerged. Even more unsettling was how long the crime scene remained active. For days, neighbors and curious villagers walked in and out of Hinterkaifeck. Some even took souvenirs, nails, tools, pieces of wood. The bodies were moved multiple times before autopsies were completed. In the chaos, crucial evidence was destroyed forever. Over the decades, investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths have returned again and again to the same suspects and theories. Each one feels plausible, and each one has holes. The jealous neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, remains the most discussed suspect. His history with Victoria, the rumors about Joseph's paternity, and his strange behavior at the crime scene all make him a prime candidate. Supporters of this theory argue that Lorenz may have snapped, furious at Andreas, desperate to claim Victoria, or enraged over Joseph's parentage. His knowledge of the property and calmness at the scene suggest familiarity, perhaps guilt. But critics point out that no forensic evidence links him to the crime. He cooperated with police, gave testimony multiple times, and lived openly in the community afterward. If he was guilty, would he really have risked so much exposure? Another theory is that the family was attacked by burglars. Perhaps the killer entered expecting quick theft, only to be confronted by Andreas or Victoria. Violence escalated, leading to all 6 deaths. But robbery doesn't explain why nothing valuable was taken. Cash, jewelry, and other items were left untouched. Why linger in the house, feeding animals and cooking meals? If this was a thief's work, it was the strangest robbery in German history. Some point to the eerie footsteps in the snow and the maid's earlier complaints of noises in the attic. Was someone already living inside Hinterkaifeck? If so, it would explain the confidence with which the killer moved about the house. It would explain the missing house keys, the unfamiliar newspaper, and the sense of being watched. But who would do this? And why target the Grubers specifically? Unless the intruder had a personal vendetta, this theory feels like a ghost story, compelling but incomplete. The most disturbing theory is that the murders were the violent climax of the incestuous relationship between Andreas and Victoria. Perhaps Victoria wanted to leave with Joseph. Perhaps Lorenz was pressuring her. Perhaps Andreas feared losing control of his household. But if Andreas was the aggressor, why would he kill himself last? And if it was Victoria or another family member, how could one person slaughter 6 people and then cover their tracks so well? This theory explains motive but not logistics. Some argue the efficiency of the murders suggests more than one attacker. To lure victims one by one into the barn without arousing suspicion would require planning, maybe even 2 people working together. The lack of clear escape tracks in the snow could also point to conspirators helping each other. If multiple people were involved, the silence of the village afterward becomes even more suspicious. Yet, after questioning more than 100 people, police never found evidence of a conspiracy. Even after a century, certain details of the case refuse to make sense. Why were the bodies carefully covered with hay and cloth? Some believe this was a sign of remorse, others a ritual or an attempt to buy time before discovery. Why feed the animals and use the farm equipment? Was the killer trying to keep up appearances so neighbors wouldn't come looking? Or were they so comfortable at Hinterkaifeck that caring for livestock felt natural? Why lure victims one at a time into the barn? This method required patience and confidence. Was it personal? Did the killer want to face each victim directly? Why no escape tracks? The original footprints led to the farm but never away. Did the killer leave later when snow melted? Or had they already been hiding inside before the murders began? Each question deepens the mystery. In 1923, the farmhouse was demolished. Workers destroyed the barn and house completely, unwilling to let it stand as a monument to horror. But that didn't erase the story. Instead, it grew. Over time, Hinterkaifeck became part of German folklore. Journalists revisited it in the 1950s, 1970s, and again in the 1990s. Each generation of detectives and students pored over the files, only to reach the same frustrating conclusion. The case could never be solved. Even today, in true crime forums, people debate it endlessly. Was it Lorenz, the jealous neighbor? A stranger in the attic? Was it a dark family secret? The theories keep Hinterkaifeck alive. The Police Academy review in 1999 came closest to offering closure. After months of work, the cadets concluded that Lorenz Schlittenbauer was the most likely suspect. But without physical evidence, their finding was speculative. The official stance of German authorities remains the same. The case is unsolved. Today, if you visit the site, you'll find only a simple stone cross marking where the farmhouse once stood. It bears the names of the 6 victims: Andreas, Kazilia, Victoria, Little Kazilia, Joseph, and the maid Maria. Locals still leave flowers there. Visitors describe a heavy silence, as though the ground itself remembers. Some claim the air feels colder, or that they hear faint noises in the wind. Whether you believe in hauntings or not, one thing is certain. The land of Hinterkaifeck has never been the same. More than 100 years later, we are left with fragments. A family slaughtered with a mattock. Footsteps leading to the house, but not away. A killer who fed livestock while 6 bodies lay in silence. Whoever did it, and whatever their motive, took the truth with them to the grave. And that brings us to the end of the Hinterkaifeck story. Or maybe just the beginning. Because now it's your turn. What theory do you believe? Was it Lorenz, the jealous neighbor? A stranger in the attic? Or was the truth darker, hidden inside the Gruber family itself? Drop your theory in the comments. Let's see which explanation makes the most sense. And if this story gave you chills, do me one favor. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who loves mysteries. Because Hinterkaifeck may never be solved, but the more people who know the story, the more it lives on. This has been one of the most chilling cases in true crime history. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe because every crime tells a story, and every mystery begs for answers.